Party Vila, and you are listening to the Forbes Books Podcast. And with Super Bowl Sunday and Valentine's Day just a few days apart this year, it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas for the wine, spirits, and beer industry. So joining me this week is a super successful Australian-born winemaker and ginsmith who has jumped into the burgeoning ready-to-drink space. Your multiple purchases of White Claw have made up a small part of the nearly $5 billion global canned alcoholic beverage market. His name is Gerry Rowland, and he is the founder of Coit Spirits, the makers of what Gerry calls an RTD that is actually RTD. Gerry, how are you today?
Good, Joe, and yourself?
I mean, I'm good, but not as good as a guy who's basically spent his entire adult life making wine, so it must be good to be you.
I feel very blessed to be able to do what I do, and that is explore things with my senses, the aromas and the flavors with whatever I'm working with, whether it be in the kitchen or working on a product.
Now, you're a longtime winemaker and then became a ginsmith, but I'm going to ask you like this big 30,000-foot view, big picture question. Why wine and spirits? How did you fall in love with this industry?
Well, I had a very good careers advisor in school, and that's the short story. But besides having to write dummy job applications and do a dummy interview, we got placed in local industry. And my family grew grapes, and I wanted to learn more about wine production. And so I was actually placed in a winery for a couple of weeks. And I just thought that was so interesting, seeing what happened with what you produced in the vineyard. And then with grapes, it's one of the few things where you see where it's taken to and all the cause and effect along the way that occurs to the grapes to bring out the expression of the aromas and the flavors.
So when you fell in love with the winemaking process, it sounds like, was your family like, now, Gerry, what are you doing? No, we sell the grapes to the vineyard. What's going on here?
They were trying to convince me not to go in that direction because the wine industry, goes through its ups and downs. So they were trying to get me to go in a different part of the agriculture, but it always drew me back. And so I worked with a very old company there in Australia for a period of time, starting out learning how to make champagne, and it just kept on going from there.
You mentioned that your parents were worried about the up and down nature of the wine business. From what I understand, Australian wines are quite popular. I'm not a big wine drinker, but talk to me in terms of Australia's role in the wine industry.
Well, I think they really try and push the flavor profiles for the new world, so people can explore different characteristics than you typically have seen that used to come from old world wines from Europe. Being able to choose the regions where you grow your grapes that are best suited to that variety has really enabled the wine industry to progress there and get accepted universally across the globe.
And your growth in the wine industry really took off when you got out of Australia, almost like Crocodile Dundee, except you didn't go to New York, you went to Napa Valley, right?
Yes. So, the goal for me was to learn about the different sub-appellations and appellations throughout the world, particularly Napa Valley of interest, because there's so many different characters to the small area with so many different microclimates and temperature regimes and soil types.
And so talk to me about your education in Napa. What was that like? Because that's probably the best of the best, right, when it comes to winemaking, especially in North America. What was that experience like?
Oh, it is. It's tremendously competitive, and that brings the best out in everybody and makes everybody work just that little bit harder on the focus on the fruit or the characteristic, on the technology or on the equipment. And so it's a great area for learning and getting a good foundation in the wine industry and wine production.
And can you take me back to the early 90s when you introduced your very own wine label? What do you remember about those days?
Oh, back in the Wild West.
Yeah.
It was a much smaller industry at those times. Fewer brands were out. It's really the cost that's occurred coming into the industry here has become monopolistic. Right. And challenging for us, a young winemaker, to do something here specifically in Napa that they would have opportunities to do in other wine growing areas.
And you mentioned the competitive nature of the wine industry. And like I mentioned, this was 1991 when you introduced your first label. And that's around the time I was in high school. And I remember as a kid, wine was sort of something that was drank by adults when they went out to restaurants. They might have had a couple of bottles in the house for special occasions, but that was pretty much it. Then there was this shift, not sure when it happened, maybe it was millennials, maybe it was like Gen X, that wine drinking just became almost Americanized as beer drinking, where not everyone had sort of different tastes in beers, then people had developed different tastes in wines that never existed, especially for someone like myself who never really understood what the industry was all about as a kid and then see it grow into what it is now. When do you think that pivot happened where drinking wine just became a way of life here for Americans?
I think the mid to late 90s, and what helped it was enough other regions that could come out with quality wine, as well as the knowledge base behind it, that it was able to be introduced at a easily accessible price point, instead of something out of what people would trial with or experiment with. And I think that really the mid 90s. Particularly with Sonoma coming online and being recognized along with Napa, that enabled that.
Do you know, how did that transition happen where, it was all these high-priced wines and then all of a sudden they're selling like $2 Chuck from Charles Shaw? What made it a rich person's drink to an everyman's drink? What was it about the process that changed along the way there, Gerry?
I think the key thing is it's the other regions outside of Napa with lower cost farming that were able to come up with the right value in there for the customer to have easily accessible wines at a good price point. So it's the other regions as well as costing and customer awareness.
You mentioned the fact that the mid-90s, that's when the wine industry changed to become a little more mainstream. And talk to me about that from the early 90s to the late 90s. How did your personal growth in this industry happen? Were you feeling those same kind of peaks that the others were feeling as well as the industry started to explode in the 90s?
Oh, it was good time to be starting out with a brand, particularly when we did in the early 90s. So when you got to the mid-late 90s or even up until 2008, the growth was very strong for those self-made brands. And so you could easily get distribution, and that's the key to the wine business and spirits business is you have to have distribution because it's illegal to sell, across state lines.
And let's get into this distribution thing because I've had numerous conversations with folks in the wine and spirits industry where we talk about wars, but the war for the shelf space. What has that been like in trying to get items on the shelf at these liquor stores and wine shops because there's only so much space. These stores can't make more space. So how competitive is that battle?
It is very competitive, but it's about choosing the right battle. And you don't go head-to-head with people or with competition or customers that aren't looking for your type of product. So if you're a fine wine producer, then you target yourself at the upper echelon of fine wine shops. And so that's the key to finding your customer base.
So let's talk about your transition from wine to gin. You mentioned it was around 17, 18 that this happened. What was it that inspired you to go outside of your comfort zone of being this wine guy to becoming a spirits guy?
I needed to explore something new. Not to say I know everything about wine, but I'd got to a stage where I needed to do something completely different, but still using my senses, my nose, my palate, what brain I've got. It really was key to coming up with that variation.
And why gin? There's a lot of spirits out there. What drew you to gin?
Well, gin is actually very complex. So you're working, unlike with grapes, where you know what the grape tastes like and you're going to make that into wine. With gin, you're using different plant parts, botanicals we call them, and each botanical is going to get distilled when you make the gin. So you're one stage removed, you're getting the pure form of that aromatic or that flavor. And so in a wine analogy, to have a beginning, a mid palate, and a finish to a wine, to achieve that with a gin, you're working with the different floral flowers to try and get the aromatics, the bark to try and get the body, the seeds for individual characters or leaves, and then also sometimes the roots as well. And each one of those different botanicals that we use to come up with the flavour profile for the gin all has to work in a harmony and be in balance.
And I'm curious, because you had all these years in the wine industry and then you go into gin. What failures, because we all like to learn from our failures, what failures did you learn along your wine journey that prepared you for gin, where you're like, okay, I'm not going to make that mistake again because I already did that?
So you take your successes, and the hard part is defining what your success is. And as with humans, quite often we think, oh, well, this is what we liked. And you focus in on that and you play around with that. And then you realize, that's not really doing what I thought it was going to do. And quite often it's something else, which is actually bringing the character out that you're looking for. The interesting part on this is that, I described the botanicals, the roots, the bark, the seeds, the fruits, the flowers, the leaves, and all of those bring a flavour. And getting back to basics, our palate looks at flavour as sweet, sour, salty, and bitter. And all flavours are made up with different combinations. When you look at something like, say, a peach, what we call a peach in flavour, it's made up from those four senses. And everything that we look up is made from those four senses. So it's really, quite challenging when you come back to creating a full flavour across the palate and using all of those different botanicals to achieve that.
Do you think that being in wine made it easier for you to get into the gin industry? Because I understand that's super competitive now. Everyone and their mother has a gin brand now, even Hollywood actors. But do you think you were in an advantage because of the fact that you had been in through the trenches of the wine industry?
Definitely. Even though I had to retrain my palate for the individual botanicals, by having learned the differences on the aromas and being able to accurately describe and pinpoint, that's not to say that you still don't learn. And then the same with the flavours, where bitterness may be coming in from something. At least my palate was trained, so I just had to reline to the new ingredients, if you like, of the botanicals of the gin.
I love to ask simple questions to complicated answers. So how do you retrain your palate?
Oh, tasting.
Really?
Sort of like when you might have a wine with somebody and you're going, I know what that aroma is, but I can't put my finger on it. And then somebody else will describe, is it raspberry, is it strawberry? And then suddenly, boom, yeah, strawberry, that's what it is. And then you've got strawberry locked in your mind. You've got that one nailed down. So whenever you look at a Pinot, maybe in the future, you might see strawberry notes or other red wines. So It's getting access to good foundation characters of each of the botanicals, and then getting those locked into your aroma and palate memory, almost like a golf swing, so that it becomes automatic for you.
And you conquered wine, you conquered gin, and then you decide to get into the RTD space, which is the ready-to-drink space. People famously know it as the spiked seltzer drinks made by the White Claws and the Trulies of the world. What made you want to get into this game now?
Well, we're not actually in that game. We chose a category that's still emerging here. And it's building and going to grow from the seltzer side, but we're actually a full cocktail, so we're 15.5% ABV, whereas the hard seltzers are more 4 to 12%, something like that. So we're quite different in the cocktail arena, although still considered an RTD, but not a seltzer. But the key thing that makes a cocktail different is our goal is a bar strength, bar quality experience. And to achieve that, you use the full juice characteristics that you blend with your spirit. So you have pulp in there as well, because it's a texture part to the experience of the flavor. And so for us, all of our cocktails are proofed with 55% juice, as opposed to water and flavors, which would be more the hard seltzer category.
Interesting. And I noticed that they're gluten-free, carb-free, and no sugar added. So how the hell did you get the taste?
Well, you've got the natural sweetness from the juice itself, and that takes very good quality juice, so you don't have any bitterness, because if you've got bitterness, you've got to have more sweetness. So quality juice, cold pressed juice, and then we use monk fruit, which is a protein from an Asian melon, which gives sweetness without there being any calories or carbohydrates. It's a protein sweetness.
Interesting. And so you mentioned the fact that you separate yourself from those other canned RTD drinks. What is the competition like in that little niche that you're exploring now? Because I'm not really familiar with any of these kind of cocktail in the cans outside of your typical hard seltzer or hard lemonades or something like that. What's the competition like in that space?
Well, it's a very young area, and the hardest thing with the competition is getting people to understand the difference there between hard seltzer and a cocktail.
Okay.
That's the key thing, is you don't go to a bar to have a hard seltzer, you go to the bar to have a cocktail.
Right.
And so that's the burgeoning area of the category, and it's quite open, and everybody in that category is really focused around delivering a lot of flavor and different flavor, innovative flavors. So I think people will be seeing, from 2022 onwards, much more in the cocktail category that will be coming out. Some in my area, which is 15-16% alcohol, where you can have one or two, we're in small cans, 1 or 2 cans, or with the people that are more in the 26 to 30%, like a Negroni or a Manhattan in a can.
Interesting. Okay. And so you mentioned that you're sort of an early entrant into this. Do you feel like some sort of explorer like Lewis and Clark, like venturing this new territory? Like, because you have no data to draw upon because it's so new. So how do you know this is going to be a success? Or how do you know what is a success when it comes to these drinks?
It comes back to getting liquid to lips, and you see the customer's satisfaction. And that tells you if you've hit on your target flavor profile and aroma, and the product is doing what it is required to do and get the customer satisfied, or if you've got a miss, or if you're close, and it's all on the customer's face as to the acceptance and the enjoyability. And then it's taking that and having that belief system behind it, that you stay with it, and it's getting the message and the word out to people, particularly with the category, the cocktail category we're just describing, so that they understand that there are actually different categories within the RTD market, that being cocktails and, seltzers, as opposed to them all being in one.
You mentioned how you developed this palate for wine, then you developed it for gin. What was it like developing a palate for a cocktail when you have all of these different tastes all mixed together into this can? Was that trickier for you?
It was actually more similar to wine for me because there was no distillation process in between. And so we're using our gin, which is distilled, but the gin part is about a third of the cocktail component. So the remaining part is actually the juices. And that for me was much more similar to blending different varieties together, like Cabernet and Cabernet Franc for a Bordeaux blend, because there's no process in between. You're using the juice character in itself and you know where you are.
And these drinks, since they're not your typical, like you mentioned, you wouldn't get a spiked seltzer at a bar. Do you see your kind of RTD, the Coit Spirit cans, do you see those being sold in bars?
In more so maybe for restaurants which have cocktails to go and the labour shortage at the moment, in that the staff on hand might be able to make a Manhattan and a Bloody Mary, but if they want something interesting to go, then they can actually go for one of these cocktails which they can have in the can ready to go. So we see opportunities there, but more so potentially with some of the train and cruise lines or in minibars and in hotels or being glass-free vents at pools and the beach. So that's where we see our customer base.
And how is the customer base reacting so far? I know it's relatively new, but what kind of feedback are you getting?
Oh, we're getting great feedback. I look very much forward to our growth that'll be coming in from the customer reactions that we see and the versatility of the products.
Great. And we are coming up on Valentine's Day, and a friend of mine told me that you have a great Valentine's Day story. Would you be able to share it for the podcast?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yes.
You sound uncomfortable. Are you sure, Gerry? I don't want to put you on the spot here.
No, it's good.
Okay, go for it.
The Valentine story is obviously how I met my wife, and it's not something you would do today because this was back in the mid to late 80s. I was hitching a ride when I first came out to Napa Valley, and my wife drove straight past me because her mother had quite rightly said, never pick up a hitchhiker. This is in Napa Valley, where we are.
Okay.
And so I walked on down the road, and she was filling up her fuel tank in the car, and she was just leaving. And she said, oh, can I give you a lift to your next winery? Because I was learning and going to all of the different wineries to get as much information as I could. And from there, we ended up in Item.
Wait a minute. Hold on a second. You met your wife hitchhiking?
Yes, that's right.
What? I mean, this does not. Again, you're right. This would not happen today. But what was it about? Is this like a love at first sight thing? Like, how did that even happen?
Yes, it was. And the heart flutters, and life takes a different course. I hadn't looked at settling in America, and before I knew it, here I was in Napa Valley.
Wow. And I mean, you are describing the 1980s. It's not like you were in 1950 when you were hitchhiking. Just so you know, hitchhiking in the 80s was pretty dangerous too. So,
believe me, at that time, I remember was the first time you would hear on the freeways the accidents that were occurring.
Oh God.
Back in the 80s there, but that's a different story. But I feel very fortunate again, also having met the love of my life.
I mean, twofold. You met the love of your life, and you were not murdered. So I think that's a win all around for you, Gerry.
Yes.
Well, Gerry, it's been a blast talking to you. It's really cool to find out more about your industry and see all the things you guys are doing. I can't wait to see what's going to come next of you, because I feel like you're one of these guys that it's like the old Moneyball thing, adapt or die. You're always looking to adapt. Is that a correct analysis of Gerry Rowland there?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, Gerry, thank you very much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, and that's it for this episode of the Forbes Books Podcast. If you enjoy the show, make sure you take a second to subscribe so you automatically get my new shows when they drop. Also, if you have a minute, I would love if you left us a review so more amazing entrepreneurs like yourself can discover the show. And please don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.